Hello again. I don't want to steal the thunder of Kelly and Charles. As I said in the program, any similarity between the actual events of Washington Crossing the Delaware and the well-known painting of Washington Crossing the Delaware is purely coincidental. And I think those of us who have done any kind of historical research, it's always how do you separate the myth from the reality? And, you know, in a lot of cases, the myth has become so ingrained that people don't want to believe that it isn't true. And this might be the best example from the Revolutionary War. I'm not sure there might be others from the Revolutionary War. But the painting, which was done, I think, in the 1850s, has become so ingrained. And anybody who's ever crossed any kind of open water knows you don't stand up in the boat. Winter, so I don't care what it is, you don't stand up in the boat. And you surely don't stand up at the bow of the boat, you know, charging across the ice-strewn river. But anyhow, having said that, Kelly and Charles are going to tell us the truth. With a capital T. You're going to believe about Washington Crossing the Delaware.
Hi, I'm Kelly Woodie. I'm Charles Woodie's wife. I call him my Hodor. I don't know what people have to call me. Just his wife. I teach middle school. I've taught at the middle school for 30 years. It makes me want to go home and look through all my orders, see if I can find one with the S. It signifies that they were struck in San Francisco, California. And of course, the 1999 is the corn description refers to the year it was in. The focus of our presentation will be on Washington Crossing the Delaware, painted by Emmanuel Leutze. Now, I've never taken a German class. I think, Spanish in high school. So, if anybody speaks German here, Leutze is, my attempt to say it is like saying. He painted while he was living in Germany 75 years after George Washington's legendary victory at Trenton, and has become perhaps the most, of course, again, unbiased, one of the most iconic images commemorating the crossing. Here is a picture of Emmanuel Leutze. He was born in Germany in 1816. He immigrated to the United States in 1825 and grew up in Philadelphia with his family. By age 14, he was painting portraits for $5 a piece. He was involved in art from a young age, especially drawing and painting, and he ended up moving back to Düsseldorf, Germany, to attend art school in 1841. And he remained in Germany from 1841 to 1851. He completed his training, and he established himself as a history painter. Leutze conceived his iconic Washington Crossing the Delaware to encourage struggles for democracy after the failure of the Revolution of 1848 in Germany. It failed mostly because they could not unify. Germany did not unify as a country until 1871. Washington Crossing the Delaware offers a vision of revolution in which people from different classes, regions, and ethnic backgrounds work together under a determined, charismatic leader to overcome extraordinary obstacles and reach a common goal. He painted 3 versions of his iconic Washington Crossing the Delaware, a series of 3, from 1848 to 1851, which was 75 years after the actual event that happened to George Washington. The first version of the series he painted in 1849 while in Germany, and he finished the painting in 1850. He used the Rhine River as a model for the Delaware River and recruited American tourists and students to serve as his models. However, that first version was damaged by a fire that broke out in his studio in 1850, and sadly it was destroyed in 1942 during World War II by another fire from a bomb raid. Ironically, Charles was like, ironically, this American Revolution painting was possibly destroyed by an American bomber. We don't know that for a fact, but it's a possibility during the World War II. He returned to the U.S. in 1859 and died at the age of 52 of a heat stroke in Washington, D.C. in 1868. So the first version got destroyed. This is the second version. This is the one you may have seen at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. He started painting version 2 in 1850 and finished it in 1851. It was exhibited in New York until it was bought by a Marshall Roberts, possibly in 1852, for $10,000. In today's money, that would be $350,000. It changed hands several times, and in 1897, it was donated to the Metropolitan Museum of Art by a private collector and museum trustee. His name was John Stewart Kennedy, and its own exhibit there in the American wing, in the museum's American wing. The third version, you can get a glimpse of it. It's hanging in a museum in Minnesota in this picture. It's the smaller size. It's only 3 feet by 6 feet long, and was possibly created when Leutze worked on his second version. It was exhibited at the White House in Washington, chose the content for emotional and symbolic impact, not historical accuracy. This painting is packed with lots of imagery that we will discuss. He believed that Washington's leadership could be an inspiring symbol for the European rebellion in the mid-1800s. This painting is a primary source for the 1850s, but a secondary source for the 1776 event. Therefore, it tells us more about Washington's legacy than his actions in his lifetime. Now, let's take a look at more symbolism of the painting. So, General Washington was worried that the enemy would cross the soon-to-be frozen river to attack Philadelphia, so he attacked first on December 25th, the night of December 25th, 1776. He chose the night before the river froze to make his attack in Trenton. The painting shows an almost sunrise in the lighter section over here. You can see even like the moon. Well, but in reality, Washington crossed in the darkness of a snowstorm that blocked all moonlight. In the painting, we see the central and dignified figure of George Washington standing. There you go. Charles was able to take the picture and snip sections so we could pull it up and see it better. So as I describe it, you can kind of see what I'm talking about with his knee bent. His right leg is lifted with his foot propped on what appears to be the wooden seat in the boat. He is looking to the left of the composition, his gaze fixed on his target ahead of him. Washington would not have been standing in the boat during the crossing. He was likely seated, but the famous Leutze shows him standing for dramatic effect. As standing in the bow of a small boat filled with soldiers on a freezing, icy river would have been incredibly unsafe. Here, George Washington crosses the Delaware, seemingly fearless. He is holding a telescope in his right hand. You can kind of see it sticking out from under his head there, which rests on the thigh of his bent leg, and his left arm is bent with his hand holding onto his coat up here, that section. On his left hip is a sheath saber here. He is officially ununiform. In uniform, I got a misspell here. Wearing the tricorn hat and a cape with an inner red lining. You can see the cape, the inside of it there, the red. And uniform underneath, black boots and gloves that appear to match the color of his uniform. Washington exemplifies a brave leader who stands tall, showing strength and determination to lead his soldiers. And although Washington was only 44 years old at the time, Leutze depicts him as in Gilbert Stuart's famous portrait of the much older ex-president. So that he was only 44 years old the night he led those guys across the Delaware River. That's amazing to me. There we go. Did I get it or? Standing just behind Washington with resolute yet seemingly apprehensive facial expressions are two figures believed to be future president, you might know, James Monroe, and future General Nathaniel Greene. Let's see. Seated to Washington's left is believed to be future General Nathaniel Greene. So this one, Charles? Okay, right here. Behind Washington, future President James Monroe is holding the flag tight in the face of the cold wind, who ends up getting wounded at the Battle of Trenton. The large flag he is holding appears to be composed of red and white stripes. You can kind of see it here. Okay. And stars that appear to be in a circle on a blue background. This is a reference to the Betsy Ross flag, which wasn't designed until the next year in 1777. So that flag didn't even exist at the time of the crossing. The flags these soldiers brought with them were state or military unit flags. If they had a shared flag, it most likely would have possibly been the Grand Union flag. In December, the Delaware River was forming new ice, not breaking up into thickly formed chunks like those pictured here, more commonly found in a spring thaw. Hanging the ice in dramatic pieces added to the immediacy and importance of the task at hand, but not to the image's historic accuracy. There are 11 men in the boat with George Washington. Some are seated and standing while rowing or engaged in other surroundings, and others appear to be sitting still. There's liveliness all around the central figure, who appears calm and resolute in contrast. Many from all walks of life joining together. The men in the boat represent a cross-section of the American colonies, including one in a Scottish bonnet. He's right here. You can see the little red pom-pom, I guess is what you call it. It probably has a great name, but right here on top is good. Another African descent facing backward here. Backward next to each other in the front. We notice Emmanuel Leutze's use of different strokes to convey texture. For example, smoother brush strokes for the men's clothing, and wooden oars in the sky, as well as the water, which is contrasted with shorter and thicker, described as choppy, brush strokes for the pieces of ice on the water surface. So you can see how he created texture with the ice compared to the water here. And then their clothing. Near the back of the boat, here's the back of the boat. There are two farmers in broad-brimmed hats. Okay, one with a bandaged head. Here?
No. Right there.
Oh, okay. I'm looking at an angle, like a side view, it's hard to see. This germ wearing what appears to be Native American clothing to symbolize that all people in the United States of America were represented. None of the enlisted men are in uniform or even dressed alike. These 9 figures represent the diversity of the American people brought together for the revolutionary cause. Here is the Native American. We were corrected once at the Cherokee Museum that they don't like to be called Native Americans, they like to be called by their tribe name. So he's representing all Native Americans, I assume. To the right of the composition are more boats with men. Back in the back here, more boats. Horses and cannons receding far into the background, all moving towards the left of the landscape. So they're all headed to the left. There you can see the flag better. See, it's got the stars appear to be in a circle and the stripes. So that's one of the biggies to me, is that flag that wasn't even designed until the next year. Many art sources about the Washington Crossing the Delaware painting mention Leutze's exercising his artistic license to express more emotional qualities, like George Washington crossing the Delaware with poise and honor. Examples include the depiction of the event during the morning when in fact it took place during the dark of the night. Additionally, the ice would have reportedly been sheets of ice and not large pieces. But on that night, the Army traveled in much bigger Durham cargo boats, and Washington would not have stood in the boat as we see in the painting. Flat ferries followed after the boats and carried the horses and cannons across the river. This includes the Betsy Ross flag, which was only created after this event took place. The overall color scheme in Washington Crossing the Delaware by Emmanuel Leutze is quite dark, with hues like deep greens, reds, blues, browns, and blacks. The lightness of the sky and the ice on the water surface create a color contrast between it and the darker colors formed by the band of boats and men along the middle of the composition. The small boats in this painting are the perfect size to show a diverse group of soldiers all rowing together for a common cause, part of Leutze's vision. The primary source of light in this painting comes from the sunrise, which serves as a highlighting effect to emphasize the central figure of Washington. It kind of silhouettes him in the sky in the background. And the men, noticeably on their faces and the glimmer of the artillery in the background. And we also see Leutze's application of dark areas to the right of the composition over here. Emmanuel Leutze utilized atmospheric perspective to create the illusion of three-dimensional space, which is conveyed by smaller, less recognizable figures in the background, here, that become larger and more focused towards the foreground, the area up near the bottom of the picture plane. There is an interplay of various types of lines in Washington Crossing the Delaware. Sorry, you have to remind me to click on Charles, I keep forgetting. Oh, there we go. So, there is an interplay of various types of lines in the Washington Crossing the Delaware painting, which convey a sense of motion in terms of the direction the men are moving, but also emphasize in terms of strength and bravery. For example, horizontal lines are created by Washington's boat that fills up the foreground, as well as the arrangement of ice on the water further into the distance. But we see the more vertical, upright figure of Washington in the boat, which creates emphasis and the idea of leadership and bravery. So all the ice back here is more horizontal lines, and the boat, and he's like the only vertical one here, and that emphasizes leadership and bravery. Another vertical line is created by the receding boats in the background of the composition, which conveys depth here. Diagonal lines are created by the long oars in the foreground. There's an oar, and there's an oar, which extend into the water as well as the flag's pole, which extends upward, creating a contrast. The compositional form of the painting is reportedly a triangular layout, you see here. It starts on the horizontal base from the boat moving upwards. From the left, our eye is directed by the oar. It starts here with the horizontal, and on the left with the oar, that leads our eye around. From the right, our eyes is directed by the rays of sunlight and the soldier at the end of the boat. The top of the triangle was created by the top of the flag's pole. So that all these lines create a triangle, which kind of leads your eye around the painting. In conclusion of our talk about the painting, Washington Crossing the Delaware painting shows George Washington as a brave leader uniting different people like farmers, immigrants, and soldiers to fight for American freedom. Even when things are tough, leading to a big win against the British that helped America win the Revolutionary War. It's a symbol of courage and teamwork, showing how Americans came together from all backgrounds for independence, though some details were made more dramatic by the German artist Emmanuel Leutze to inspire people. Leutze painted this to inspire his own country's fight for freedom, using America's story. Again, the painting, Washington Crossing the Delaware, was donated in 1897 to the Metropolitan Museum of Art by its owner, John Stuart Kennedy. It had been reframed several times before the museum received it, and was housed in this very simple frame, because sadly the original frame was lost. So for over 90 years the painting was displayed in this plain, unremarkable frame. This is my favorite part of the presentation, I'll just have to be honest. I love all the symbolism and stuff in the painting, but this was amazing to me. In 2007, a series of photographs that were taken by in 2007, a series of photographs that were taken in 1864 by Matthew Brady were discovered at the New York Historical Society. And those photos revealed the elaborate original 19th century trophy style frame featuring an eagle, the top, flags, and other military symbols. The Metropolitan Museum of Art decided that the painting should be displayed in a replica of this magnificent frame. So they commissioned a company called Eli Wilner and Company to hand carve a massive replica of the 19th century frame. In my research, I found a series of images to give you a glimpse of the extensive workmanship that Eli Wilner and Company put into making the monumental frame, based on the 19th century photos by Matthew Brady, showing the painting in its original frame. Because the painting is so large, it could not be removed from the gallery. So the frame had to be constructed and fitted around the painting at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Here you can see one of the workers standing in the middle of the enormous frame that is 12 feet tall and 21 feet long. Charles and I brought our measuring tape so we could kind of get an idea of just how long this frame is. I kind of guessed and said, I bet it's about the size of that screen, but I was wrong. Yeah. Here's 21. That's how long it is. Now, anybody want to try to measure the height? Not sure about this 12, yeah.
I would say to the top of the
12
projection.
feet, 12 feet tall.
I would say to the top of the
Are you
projection.
about 6 foot tall?
I am 6
So
foot.
take two of you, and that's how tall it is. So, it's amazing. And you see the guy, where's the little corner thingy? Right here, standing right in the middle of it. That's incredible. In this photo, in this photo you see a craftsman carving the eagle by hand. So they use a type of wood that's really easy for carving called, I think it's called basswood. They're carving out the eagle and trying, as they work on this replica. Here's a closer up view of it. The only reference the craftsmen have is those Matthew Brady photos, which they keep beside them throughout the entire process for close reference on detail. I looked around hoping to see a picture. They did a lot of research also to make sure they got everything right. Here, the craftsman is working on the carved eagle topped crest. By far the most extensive work involved this 14-foot wide eagle topped crest. So just that eagle part at the top is 14 feet long, consisting of many objects specific to war. The crest contains flags, pikes, bayonets, a drum, munitions case, and shield, and resting on top is a stately spread winged eagle. Underneath the assembly, a furled ribbon reads, "First in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen." A line excerpted from Henry Lee's eulogy to Washington in 1799. Each corner bears a round shield with carved flourishes that were painted with a special liquid clay in preparation for the application of gold leaf. The entire frame was gilded with over 12,500 sheets of gold leaf. There you can get a glimpse of, there's a star, you'll see it's at the top edge of the frame. So here is the eagle and the part that goes at the top. You probably already can see some of the, some of the things we talked about. There's a drum. The quote that was read at Washington's eulogy. Charles, are these the bayonets down here?
Mhm.
Do y'all see anything else?
Got the saber.
There?
Saber.
Oh, yeah, I see that. You think, oh, this right here.
Got
It's a
that one
ramrod.
and the other one.
There's a ramrod, right here?
Yep.
There. What is, do you think that's a cannon?
Yes.
Oh, there's cannonballs. Yeah, there's cannonballs. And maybe that possibly is something? Another cannon? And this, is that the ammo case, munitions case? Okay. Okay, so here is after they made the frame, an up-close view of one of the round shields with carved flourishes after it's been gilded. The frame is water gilded and carefully patinaed to give the frame the appearance of age. The result is a frame that has the charm and beauty of a period frame. The wide cove molding with its running acanthus leaf pattern near the edge and overlapping leaf motif on the top rail were crafted and assembled after working in partnership with museum curators and researchers to determine the many design elements of the frame. This is at the bottom edge of the frame, and it is two cannons.
Yep.
And there's the stars, I think, that we saw previously, so they had not attached this piece yet, I guess. She was, in the picture where she was, putting the gold leaf on there. Okay. So, the next picture, it kind of gives you an idea, an idea of the size of this painting with this lady standing here. Her shoulders come to the edge of the frame there, and it's just amazing to me. It ended up weighing 3,000 pounds, so I'm not sure how did they even hang that on the wall. I'm sure they had some kind of like steel or metal things. I don't know. They'd have to. Yeah, that's just amazing. I'm just amazed by it, the frame. I love the painting. Don't get me wrong, but the frame's amazing too. How they made a replica of the frame based off those pictures. So, does anybody have anything they would like to add? I know there's a lot to studying about this painting, and that's just based on the research I've done, the symbolism in it by Leutze, and
I was thinking, the flourishes on the side makes me think of the type of pins that they used back pins at that time, and on the very bottom where somebody indicated cannons, I was thinking of carrying, orders or something back and forth.
oh, they do it in a metal case.
Some sort of metal case.
I think they called these shields, but I don't know if they used shields during the Revolution.
I would think it would be more amazing or outstanding the fact that you said that it's a replica but to think about the work that went into the original and it being outside.
Yeah, it makes me, what happened to it? First of all, it was too big to even take out, to make that frame, to take it out of the mint. So what happened to that? I bet it was taken apart or something, or, I don't know. If anybody finds out what happens to that original frame, I'm curious. Thank you.
Kelly's told you all about the painting, she's told you about the frame, and now you wanna know, well, how did we get here? In 1775, the siege of Boston, was taking place at this time. William Howe was there in Boston, and, during this time, there were three gentlemen in Britain that were the brain trust there. You had Lord North and his Secretary of American Operations, who was George Germain, along with the first Lord of the Admiralty, Lord Sandwich. His cousin was sirloin, and his other one was roasted beef, but that was actually his title, Lord Sandwich. The British strategy was very simple. They felt that America could not withstand a direct assault by the British military. The war could be fought the same as they had been fought in Europe. Well, that kind of wasn't the case. The tactics had changed in America since the French and Indian War within the colonies. The colonists had learned to fight a different type of warfare than what they were fighting in Europe. And then they believed, and this is something a lot of armies have made this mistake, they believed that victory would bring loyalty. Well, that particular strategy was totally wrong. After losing Boston in the spring of 1776, the British were concerned about the need for manpower. Hence, you can see that they have a new group here, the Hessians. On learning King George III had hired the Hessians, many colonists knew that they would no longer be viewed by the king or parliament as citizens, but rather they would be viewed from here on out as subjects. Now, a couple things about these Hessians. The Hessians were an important part of the Revolutionary War, but who were they? And why were these German soldiers fighting for the British? In the 18th century, Germany, as you were told earlier, was not a unified nation as we know today. Instead, it was a bunch of smaller principalities and counties that were loosely organized under the declining Holy Roman Empire. They had their scuffles between the states that resulted in a feudal-like society, complete with power struggles and internal warfare. As she told you, German unification didn't take place until almost 100 years after ours in 1871. Conflicts within the German states and other European powers created a body of well-trained and experienced soldiers, but hurt the feudal economy. To alleviate this, each of these counties and small principalities and so forth, the princes of these small German states often hired out their armies to supplement their income. German troops, they actually saw combat in the War of the Spanish Succession. My ancestors saw them in the Jacobite Rebellion in Scotland in 1715, fighting for the British under George's father, George I. And perhaps the best example of the peculiarities of German states was during the Austrian succession. This is between 1740 and 1748. Now here's a pretty good twist. The German troops fought on both sides of that conflict. Some hired by Britain and some hired by France. When the war clouds had developed here in the American Revolution and they begun to gather, Germany turned to the German states to provide this needed manpower. After a 7-year war, remember we talked about the earlier war, the French and Indian War, The British demobilized in order to alleviate the massive debt that the French and Indian War had caused them. Many of their budget cuts came from the army in order to maintain a powerful navy, and to this day, Britain's main claim to fame is their navy. And they relied on that to protect their empire. When the Revolutionary War began, Britain trained soldiers to fight not only in North America, but also throughout the entire empire. In North America, the German troops were referred to as Hessian mercenaries. But this is kind of somewhat inaccurate. Great Britain hired 34,000 German soldiers, being generalized as Hessians. The term mercenary is misleading because in the modern sense, mercenary implies a soldier that's for hire, who makes a large amount of money for their services. The German soldiers, in this case, had no choice. They were still in the army of their prince, who had decided to rent them out and their services to a foreign power without the individual soldiers' approval. While German troops were well paid, they did not receive any bonus for service for Great Britain. German troops served throughout the Revolution. They were both feared and admired for discipline and ferocity. German troops played an important role in many battles, but the most famous was their service in the Northern Theater here in the American Revolution. At White Plains, Hessians overran the American defenders. Colonel Rao, who you'll hear of later, he later commanded the Hessian garrison at Trenton that was defeated and captured. And Rao himself was mortally wounded in battle. Germans did see action in the South during the Southern campaign. Hessians were at the siege of Charleston, and regiments surrendered with Cornwallis at Yorktown. Many of the Germans were captured during the Revolutionary War, held out in, where's Gary? He's back there, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This area was ideal because of the distance from the fighting and the large German-speaking population that happened to be in the Lancaster, Pennsylvania area. Between 40 to 50%, remember we said there were 34,000? Between 40 to 50% of the German troops did not return home. Many of these were casualties, but some chose to stay in the United States, drawn on the opportunity of freedom and a new nation. Without the added strength of the German troops, the British effort would have been seriously hampered. In addition to fighting in North America, German troops saw action in other parts of the British Empire, most notably Hanoverian troops at the Great Siege of Gibraltar. The Hessians were a critical part of the American Revolution in the understanding of the history and to give a better understanding of the entire war. During this time, Washington had a new priority, and the new theater of operations would be New York. Now you might say, why is that? Well, at the time, we always think about the capital of our country being where? Washington, D.C. Well, no, it wasn't always Washington, D.C. New York was the centerpiece of activity during the Revolutionary time, and that was the capital. So that became focus number one for Washington. And during this time period, the British chased Washington all around New York. I mean, they did something in Brooklyn, they did something in Manhattan, they're all around this area. And General Howe, who you saw earlier at Boston, he decided in June of 1776 that he would land 20,000 troops in hopes of intimidating the colonists. And so they basically land and they're headed toward New York. Now, at the same time, you notice we're talking about June 1776. What's the next big event getting ready to happen in America? In fact, we're probably going to hear a little bit about it this year. Okay? A month later, the Declaration of Independence is signed. And also, as a precursor, Thomas Paine, somebody had, I think Tom had it on his slideshow today. Thomas Paine's Common Sense was published in January of this year, 1776. and a committee was formed to write the declaration in April. And it's kind of funny because, you know, we talked about, you know, the moments leading up to it. You know, Hal has already given them a great incentive. He's just landed 20,000 troops. So these guys get busy and they finish this declaration. Well, they finish it, they announce it, what happens? Well, if you're gonna do that, then we'll just up the ante. All right, so then, in August of 1776, with Lord Cornwallis and a group of new friends, notice there's a British flag, but here's a new one. Whose flag's that? That's the Hessian flag. The Hessians come with the British in August of 1776, and that brings those numbers to 32,000. That don't sound like a lot today, but when you realize that Washington's sitting there in New York and he's probably less than 5,000 men, that's a pretty overwhelming odds. Normally when you go into battle, you want to say, I want my odds to be at least better than 2 to 1, 3 to 1. I mean, this guy's going, you know, 5 or 6 to 1 in some cases. So those are some serious numbers that they have brought in. Washington, who's in New York, and we talked about how he gets all chased all around New York, well, he has to eventually find a new position because he has to leave New York. And when he does, he winds up down here in Pennsylvania, okay, across the Delaware River. And he's sitting here in December. He's got a couple of things that's getting ready to happen. Number one, most of his men's enlistments are going to end come January 1st. And here they've been kind of smacked around all in New York, and he's sitting there going, if we don't have victory here soon, I don't know that I'm going to be able to keep these guys energized to keep doing this. So, as a result, he comes up with a new plan. He says, well, we're going to attack Trenton. Well, what's Trenton? Well, if you'll notice, there's that flag again, and it's not British. The Hessians are actually there in Trenton. And he says, we're going to attack, and we're going to use what's referred to today as a nice pincer movement. We're going to come at them come around them, both sides, and we'll squeeze them in the middle. Well, he had one crossing that was going to happen here, and 2 that were going to happen here. And he gave kind of an inspirational charge. You know, we always think about, you know, we'll hear the saying, you know, the man on the sea will say, well, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. You know, well, he kind of gave his troops one as well. He said, here is going to be the challenge phrase for this operation. It's pretty simple and pretty self-explanatory. Victory or death. This is basically going to be a victory, or it's going to be the death of our revolution. Because it'll be over if we don't win. So, his troops, they cross, as she said earlier, they cross the Delaware River and into New Jersey. This operation takes a considerable amount of time, more than they had anticipated. And when you realize that they're only getting maybe 30, 40 men in a boat, it's taking quite a few trips to make this happen. And Washington, who's on the other side, he's over there first. He's watching all his men come across, and he even contemplates calling this off because it's taking too long. In fact, he had hoped to be attacking the Hessians before the sun came up. Well, it turns out he didn't get all his men across the Delaware River until almost 3 in the morning. Now, the 3 in the morning thing, that don't sound like a bad thing. You know, okay, 3 in the morning. Well, let's talk about that for a second. It's 3 in the morning. You It's 29 degrees. You're in the middle of a snowstorm. And now guess what, fellas? We get to walk 10 miles in this snowstorm. Now, for some of you, you don't think about this, and this doesn't look like anything really unusual, but we have a couple of new members here. Scott, just think about carrying this for 10 miles. And you're a fairly good sized fella, but after about that second mile, that thing's gonna get pretty heavy. Right? So when you think about doing all these things with something this big and this heavy, and remember these guys back then, you're lucky, 140, 160 pounds in some cases carrying these. The weapon alone weighs over 10 pounds. So that's not counting any ammunition or anything else you're carrying. But that's a serious hike for 10 miles in a snowstorm in the middle of the night. So these guys actually make it to Trenton, and do you think the battle went like Washington had it played out in his mind? No, of course not. It never goes that way. Okay, so Washington turned out the 3 crossings that were planned, and remember the southern crossings that were planned here, they didn't happen. The river was too frozen, and they couldn't make those crossings. So Washington's men crossed over and then started the hike to Trenton. Now, the next morning, the German soldiers, as they were told, they kind of didn't think anything like that was going to happen. So they were kind of ill-prepared for all of a sudden, all these Continentals or rebels, as they call them, showed up on their doorstep. And it was an interesting outcome for them. And let me get back to that. You might say, well, what kind of outcome? Okay, well, in this case, how many Americans were killed in the Battle of Trenton? 0. Big goose egg. We like that. Wounded, 5. We mentioned one of the 5 that got wounded was Monroe. Okay? How many were captured? We like that goose egg again? 0. Right? Now, on the British/Hessian side, they had 22 killed. They had 83 wounded. And they had 800 captured. Now, I saw one thing while looking at this, and I'm not going to say it's, I suspect it's true, but I don't know for sure. But the PBS special, one of the PBS specials that I saw, we're talking about the Battle of Trenton. Even though we're talking about casualties and so forth, they say that there were actually 2 of the Americans that froze to death on the 10-mile hike. So it gives you an idea of the determination these folks had to have to do that. Now there are here. There was one Hessian who changed sides. Okay. Now we know this Hessian. What's his name? Yosemite Sam. Yeah, we all know him, right? But there was another one. Okay. This gentleman is Conrad. You heard Dr. Lafferty and all them talking about spelling issues. Well, this is an example of a spelling issue. It was Conrad with a K when he was in Germany, but here it's spelled with a C. In Germany, his family was known as Crayon, but here it kind of got Americanized and it became Crump. He was born in Hessen, Germany. He lived to be almost 82, 83 years old. Now, he's buried over here in now Caldwell County. Now, look at how his life went. Conrad was a Hessian soldier. When he came to America, he was was captured at the Battle of Trenton. He was taken to New York as a prisoner of war. He was later exchanged back to the British. He managed to dress up as a woman and walk freely out of the British camp and return to the South Carolina, North Carolina area to continue fighting. After the war, he settled in Cole County. Now, you notice his marker? What type of marker is this? It's a VA marker. That's right. And you'll notice it identifies him as a member of Marion's South Carolina Brigade in the Revolutionary War. Now, I have one other that I wish to play the importance.
I'm a Hessian without no aggression. If you can't beat 'em, join 'em.
Now, in the end of this presentation, we talked about the Met, we talked about this painting, and here's the last thing I want to conclude with. Next time you look at this painting, remember that something that happened even in New Jersey has a connection to Burke County. And Mrs. Kelly Crump. Thank you.